That's my cross to bear, and that's probably the main thrust of my work, and the main pain that I suffer as a human being, more than the loss of a boyfriend or anything.
Joni Mitchell, folk goddess, lyrical genius, and a fierce defender of musical integrity. While the world reveres her poetic soul and genre-defying legacy, Mitchell isn't one to hand out praise easily. In fact, some of the biggest names in music have found themselves in her crosshairs. From biting sarcasm to ice-cold dismissals, Joni hasn't held back when it comes to calling out what she sees as inauthentic, shallow, or downright offensive in the music world. But which bands made her blood boil the most? Get ready to explore the other side of this iconic artist, the one armed with a razor-sharp tongue and zero tolerance for pretenders. Let's dive into the top 6 bands that Joni Mitchell hated the most. John Lennon. Joni Mitchell's brief but memorable encounter with John Lennon remains one of the more fascinating clashes between iconic musicians of the 20th century. Their meeting took place during Lennon's infamous Lost Weekend, a chaotic 18-month period between 1973 and 1975, marked by his separation from Yoko Ono, heavy drinking, and erratic behavior. This was a time when Lennon was frequently seen partying with the likes of Harry Nilsson and Keith Moon, and Mitchell, known for her sharp intellect and introspective artistry, did not find his company particularly impressive or appealing. Mitchell later recounted their meeting with a tone of obvious discomfort, recalling an immediate sense of unease in Lennon's presence. The friction appeared to stem not just from their vastly different personalities, but from what Mitchell described as a class difficulty. According to her, Lennon exhibited a kind of defensiveness or hostility that she attributed to his working-class background, a sharp observation that cut to the heart of the social and emotional barriers she felt defined him. Working-class people have a fear of middle-class people, she bluntly stated, suggesting that Lennon's attitude was shaped by a lingering sense of insecurity. This comment illuminates one of the more complex dynamics at play between the two: class identity. While Mitchell herself did not come from a life of privilege, she grew up in a modest middle-class family in Saskatchewan, Canada. Her place in the bohemian folk scene, with its emphasis on intellectualism and poetic lyricism, stood in contrast to Lennon's more raw, rebellious rock persona. Where Mitchell was contemplative and precise, Lennon was brash and irreverent. Their brief interaction seemed to reflect not just personal incompatibility, but a broader philosophical divide. Mitchell's comments also hint at a deeper critique of Lennon's character. She seemed to view his belligerence during that time as not merely the result of substance abuse or emotional turmoil, but as part of a deeper psychological response to class-based insecurity. It's an interpretation that paints Lennon not simply as a party-hardened rock star, but as someone struggling with his own sense of place in the world, someone who had risen to global fame and wealth, but perhaps never felt fully comfortable in elite circles. Mitchell's ability to dissect that internal conflict speaks to her own intellectual acuity and her willingness to analyze behavior through a social lens. Their artistic differences might have further fueled their animosity. On the one hand, Joni Mitchell was an artist with great musings of composition and careful engagement with personal storytelling and finely tuned social commentary. John Lennon, on the other hand, a co-equal virtuoso in his own right, tempered his message through raw emotionalism, barren directness, and polemical triteness. To Mitchell, it must have appeared that Lennon was belaboring his point. To Lennon, a woman really having too much introspective depth, someone really self-serious, or very precious. Such artistic divergences would have probably incited mutual skepticism. With Lennon's erratic disposition left in all its agitation during the period of his so-called Lost Weekend, one imagines a dimension of sarcasm and sharp retorts emerging within their relationship, one devoid of respect. In this difficult era of his life, provocative outbursts characterized Lennon's behavior. And never one to quarrel with a man, Mitchell was equally forthright with her own incisive rejoinders. Although their time together was no more than a flash in the pan, that moment had clearly registered in Mitchell's consciousness, not with a sense of awe, but with a sense of dissatisfaction at the disparity of values and energy between them. If there was any chance of finding a way to meet again outside the arena of art, one could speculate about how the previous contradictions might have been worked out. By the end of the 1970s, he had started to recede from public view and settle for a more mundane lifestyle. His last interviews revealed traces of a more reflective outlook on the world, with new hints of maturity. In a more meditative form, he could perhaps have accepted parts of Mitchell's statements. But, as it stands, the recorded meeting will represent one half of a confrontation between two cultural talismans that were brilliant, but joined by the lack of any mediation between them. What strikes one most about Mitchell's account of her confrontation with Lennon is her unyielding psychological and sociological analysis, one that goes past the simple matter of dislike between the two persons. The clash was not merely categorized as a drunken rock star being hazed by accusations and allegations, it cast out rays of hopeful insights into class awareness and emotional denial. Such a reading points as much to her own worldview as it does to Lennon's behavior. It reveals her tendency to look for meaning beneath the surface, even in these fleeting interactions. For Mitchell, the event was more than an awkward brush with superstardom. It crystallized her notion of the widening gulf between the introspective artist and the showy beat of celebrity codes that she has called on in wider critiques of the music industry. But if you thought her clash with Lennon was intense, wait until you see how she responded to this modern pop icon who once tried to play her on screen. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has long cited Joni Mitchell as a major influence on her songwriting, particularly praising Mitchell's introspective, confessional style and her ability to transform personal experience into poetic, resonant music. Swift's admiration for Mitchell is evident in many of her own songs, such as All Too Well and The Archer, which echo Mitchell's emotionally raw and narrative-driven approach. As Swift transitioned from country star to global pop phenomenon, she maintained a lyrical depth that many critics and fans likened to Mitchell's storied legacy. Yet, despite this deep reverence, Mitchell has been surprisingly dismissive of Swift and her work. The most pointed example of this came in response to the long-rumored biopic Girls Like Us, which was based on Sheila Weller's book of the same name and intended to portray the lives of Joni Mitchell, Carole King, and Carly Simon, three groundbreaking female singer-songwriters. Taylor Swift was reportedly eager to take on the role of a young Mitchell, a casting choice that sparked much conversation due to Swift's open admiration and her musical kinship with Mitchell. However, Mitchell herself did not approve of the project, and even less so of Swift's potential involvement. Mitchell's reaction to Swift's casting was scathing and deeply personal. She famously remarked, "I don't know what her music sounds like, but I do know this. If she's going to sing and play me, good luck." This curt dismissal suggested not only a lack of familiarity with Swift's work, but also a lack of interest in even exploring it. She went further, telling the producers of the film that all you've got is a girl with high cheekbones, reducing Swift's involvement to a matter of appearance rather than talent or artistic merit. These statements were widely interpreted as cutting and perhaps even cruel. Mitchell's disdain seemed rooted not only in her skepticism of the film itself, but also in her broader mistrust of contemporary pop culture and the music industry's prioritization of image over substance. To her, Swift's inclusion in a project meant to celebrate artistic integrity and emotional truth was emblematic of a culture shift she disapproved of, one that favored marketability and branding over genuine artistry. Mitchell's words reflected a generational rift as much as a personal critique. Interestingly, many of the ideals which Mitchell holds dear, such as artistic independence, emotional honesty, and reinvention, are precisely the ideals that Swift herself has so strongly demonstrated. Swift's decision to re-record her early albums in a battle to regain ownership of her masters, her pivot toward indie folk with Folklore and Evermore, and her evolving lyrical voice all suggest a commitment to artistic control and depth that might have been respected by Mitchell under different circumstances. But of course, for all those things, it seems less about Swift's artistry than what she signifies within a system that Mitchell has rejected from the beginning. That Mitchell even refuses to acknowledge Swift's music only emphasizes how distanced she is from today's mainstream music scene. While other legendary artists like Bob Dylan willingly throng to younger artists, Mitchell reserves her usual criticism of current trends, often lamenting what she perceives to be a decline in both musical and lyrical authenticity. Viewed in boundary terms, her reaction to Swift, who is arguably one of the most lyrically sophisticated artists in contemporary pop, suggests deep skepticism, not just of people, but generally of the values of the whole industry. Mitchell's reaction to Swift relates to a more general pattern of how she would typically respond to contemporary artists who are hugely commercially successful. To Mitchell, fame being construed in the framework of a system she regards fundamentally as faulty one driven by image, marketing, and spectacle casts a shadow on the true authenticity of the work itself. Swift, given all this, as one of the most visible figures in modern music, would certainly be caught up in all these interpretations, regardless of her songwriting merit. This skepticism speaks to Mitchell's ongoing critique of the evolutionary process in the entertainment industry, where, for her, popularity is inversely related to artistic sincerity. Mitchell's hesitance about embracing Swift was probably propelled by her inclination to shield her own narrative and legacy from someone else, potentially taking center stage as her biopic protagonist. The idea of having a younger, globally famous artist purporting to be her might have seemed reductive or even menacing. Rather, Mitchell seems to shut down the entire premise by not entrusting Hollywood or mainstream culture with the story that has to be told in her terms. In this way does she adds to the assertion that real artistry cannot be repackaged or replicated without loss of sensitivity. Ultimately, Mitchell's comments about Swift leave more questions than they answer. Was it only aesthetics and commercialism that formed the basis of the dismissal? Or was it a defensive measure for the legacy, blocking out any representation that might reduce the labors of her life to a simplistic or commodified version? Either way, her comments bring home the point that such scenarios remind one of a relationship within which musical generations tend to forge, especially where legacy and authenticity are concerned. Even if, in principle, Swift owes a clear debt to the influence of Mitchell, she has yet to receive the elder icon's approbation, perhaps never will. Bob Dylan. Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan, two of the most influential figures in modern songwriting, might seem like natural allies given their shared roots in the 1960s folk revival and their mutual impact on the music world. Early in her career, Mitchell even acknowledged Dylan's role in shaping her artistic approach. She once described his 1965 song Positively 4th Street as a revelation, an example of how songwriting could be brutally honest and emotionally raw. This realization helped liberate her own lyricism, encouraging her to mine her personal experiences with unfiltered depth. In many ways, Dylan served as a catalyst for Mitchell's early creative evolution. However, what began as admiration gradually transformed into disdain. By the 1970s, Mitchell's perception of Dylan had shifted dramatically. She began criticizing him with increasing intensity, targeting not only his artistic choices, but his very identity as a performer. Her comments went far beyond simple professional rivalry. They cut to the core of Dylan's legacy. "Bob is not authentic at all. He's a plagiarist," Mitchell declared, leveling one of the most serious accusations a songwriter can make. To her, Dylan's brilliance was overshadowed by what she saw as a patchwork of borrowed ideas and personas. Mitchell also took issue with Dylan's ever-changing image. Over his career, Dylan has famously reinvented himself multiple times, from folk troubadour to electric rock provocateur, from country crooner to born-again Christian, and beyond. While many view this constant evolution as a hallmark of artistic daring, Mitchell saw it as disingenuous. In her eyes, Dylan had constructed a series of masks rather than presenting an authentic self. "He's invented a character to deliver his songs," she said. To Mitchell, this theatricality felt like deception, a betrayal of the raw, emotional truth she believed songwriting should convey. Her critiques extended beyond the philosophical to the personal. In a particularly biting remark, Mitchell said, "I hated sharing a microphone with him because he had rotten breath." This comment, while humorous on the surface, underscores the level of personal distaste she seemed to feel toward Dylan. It wasn't just that she thought he was artistically inauthentic. She found his very presence unpleasant. Such a blunt and unfiltered statement suggests a long-standing tension that had eroded any sense of mutual respect they may have once shared. Musically, Mitchell dismissed Dylan in the ability to play instrumentally. He complained of his musicianship, thus pronouncing, "He's not a great guitar player," while questioning his voice uniqueness with the tag that he had borrowed his voice from old hillbillies. These comments hit squarely at the heart of someone acclaimed as an innovator in American music, so that for the person so celebrated for raw vocal delivery and a distinctive guitar style, Mitchell's accusations would be interpreted more as a derivative and unoriginal artist more adept at adopting personas rather than crafting something truly his own. Mitchell's scathing critique of Dylan could also be seen in the light of her greater disillusionment with the music industry itself. Throughout her career, she has screamed against the commercialization of art and emotive flattening in modern music. To her, Dylan wasn't just a person to criticize, he represented a whole artistic idea she disliked. His honest lyrics had turned into everything he once hated: carefully crafted image, watered-down art, fame over real creativity, and so on. There lies irony in Mitchell's attacks, however, for she herself performs under an assumed name. Roberta Joan Anderson is born into a public identity as Joni Mitchell. Though she avers that her work reflects her true self, the fact that she herself took over an alternative name complicates her critique of Dylan's artistic transformations. Ultimately, what Mitchell seems to dislike about Dylan is the similarity in their divergent approaches toward the idea of music per se. For Dylan, music and its craft itself, therefore, his quality of ambiguity lies in the face of exploration through expression and invention. They are articulate rather than accurate for Mitchell. The harshness of the words stems from her uncompromising standards. Just when Mitchell's critiques couldn't get any more ruthless, her next target takes the spectacle of pop to a whole new level: Madonna. Joni Mitchell's criticism of Madonna is among the most scathing she has ever directed at another artist, and it reflects her broader disillusionment with the music industry's transformation over the past few decades. For Mitchell, Madonna symbolizes the shift from artistry to spectacle, a movement away from musical depth and toward an era where image, controversy, and marketing dictate success. Mitchell has long positioned herself as a defender of emotional authenticity and lyrical craftsmanship. And in her view, Madonna represents everything that undermines those values. Her disdain is not simply personal, but rooted in a deep concern for what she sees as the spiritual and artistic decay of the music industry. At the core of Mitchell's critique is her belief that the visual medium, especially music videos, has overtaken the actual substance of music. She has openly lamented how the rise of MTV and the culture of visual branding have pushed artists to focus more on appearance than on musical innovation or emotional truth. Mitchell remarked, "Music has become burlesque over the last few years. Video's done that." For her, this isn't merely a stylistic shift. It represents a loss of integrity, a replacement of introspective songwriting with performative, often hollow, entertainment. In this framework, Madonna isn't just a pop star, she's a symptom of an industry-wide illness that prizes shock value over soul. Mitchell's most quoted remark about Madonna, "She's like a living Barbie doll but a little bit on the blue side," reveals just how pointed her assessment is. In this metaphor, Madonna becomes a manufactured icon of idealized femininity, engineered for mass consumption. The reference to Barbie underscores Mitchell's perception that Madonna is less an artist and more a product, polished and packaged to appeal to the widest audience. The additional jab, a little bit on the blue side, implies a kind of risque vulgarity, a nod to Madonna's frequent use of sexual imagery to provoke and captivate. For Mitchell, this form of self-presentation isn't empowering. It's manipulative, shallow, and ultimately harmful to the artistic landscape. One of the most detrimental remarks made from Judith's perspective is when she asserts she thinks she's a role model, and it's a terrible role model. It's death to all things real. This is a fairly serious blow, really. It undermines her aesthetic and performance style, while extending itself to a critique of the effect Madonna has in culture over generations. Empowerment for Madonna, to Mitchell, is nothing of the sort. For her, it's all girlfriendy nonsense, a smokescreen for unattainable ideals and commercial-oriented priorities. To Mitchell, such ideas are, in her opinion, an insult to the art form and a social danger impeding young women and jading the real interpretation of artistic endeavor. These statements also reflect the bigger frustration in Mitchell with expressions of female empowerment in music through figures like Madonna. Whereas Mitchell gained recognition based on her songs and their emotional truth, she asserts that modern female artists must tiptoe around marketability, looks, and sex appeal just to stay afloat. Madonna was thus an emissary of a new trend, making performance art out of music. Performance art that often dulled senses and equates with neither lyric nor emotion. In her view, that is not just a matter of perspective, it is a rejection of what music used to stand for. In the end, disdain for Madonna as a pop star encapsulates the voice of Mitchell's condemnation of the way the music scene has evolved. She mourns the days when outward appearance and efficacy were not worthy trade-offs for judging the text and melody of songs. Madonna personifies everything that Mitchell abhors, devoid of any substance and artistic brilliance, a potent mix of carefully managed persona and global reach. And her statement, "Death to all things real," is not just a comment on some pop star, it is a lament regarding a cultural turn, which, in Mitchell's opinion, has drawn music away from the land of truth, intimacy, and authentic human connection. The Rolling Stones. Joni Mitchell's disdain for the Rolling Stones adds yet another chapter to her long-standing refusal to conform to mainstream music ideals or embrace the dominant forces in rock culture. While the band is celebrated for revolutionizing rock and roll with their rebellious energy, Mitchell saw through the gloss of legend and spotlighted what she considered the troubling foundation beneath it, one built on showmanship, bravado, and toxic masculinity. She wasn't merely offering a contrarian opinion for the sake of being different. Her critique was rooted in her core artistic values, values that placed introspection, nuance, and truth above shock and swagger. Her comments about Mick Jagger were especially brutal. Calling his stage persona a parody of male sexuality and repulsive, Mitchell didn't just challenge his performance style, she outright dismantled it. For her, the exaggerated gyrations and overt sexual posturing weren't liberating or rebellious, but cartoonish displays of ego wrapped in leather pants. Where fans saw charisma, Mitchell saw caricature. And in her world, where songwriting was sacred and emotion was a tool for human connection, that kind of performance was not just unappealing, it was an affront. Mitchell's aversion to the Stones was not a fleeting opinion, but part of a broader philosophy she consistently expressed throughout her career. From early interviews to the lyrics in her music, she voiced her discontent with an industry that rewarded volume over vulnerability and power over poetry. The Rolling Stones, with their dominance of the rock charts and cultural imagination, became the perfect symbol of everything she stood against. In dismissing them, she wasn't just criticizing a band, she was calling out an entire structure that elevated image above introspection. It was a powerful talk coming from someone with experience. Mitchell wasn't looking in through the window, but rather was herself in the same era and walked the same streets. But while she saw the Stones, the males she suffered with practically all his lifetime, having fun. Ms. Mitchell was forced to fight such conceptions as she became one already heard of and not really considered an active member. In fact, she supported witnessing the culture that went from applause for male excess to silence or encouragement of the female as supportive actions. All the while, there were glimmers of critique and a vivid refusal to resist that. The very contrast between the two artists informs us about a wider gender divide in the music world. Mitchell's fusion of the literary and musical comprises vivid emotional landscapes and social commentary. For the Stones, it was all about immediacy, sensation, and provocation, which exerted a degree of control over the whole media world. Mitchell's rejection was thus not just an aesthetic rejection, it was an ideological position. She just did not think volume or rebellion made music important, but whether it spoke some truth, some humanity. It is significant to register her extreme affront. Artists are usually expected to play well according to their legends and icons, even when the fit is uneasy. But Mitchell never played that game. She cared about no name-dropping or building a kind of cultural capital through alliances. Her rejection of the Rolling Stones was an act of artistic self-preservation, one that kept her work and her values intact. It felt like she'd drawn a line in the sand and dared the industry to cross it. Mitchell's uncompromising disdain for artistic posturing extended well beyond the Stones. She rejected the very terms critics used to define her. She saw the label confessional as reducing and vaguely misogynistic, a telling sign of how the music world trivialized women's creative complexity. So it was ever more contradictory for these guys, whose whole persona was based on arrogance and bravado, to be praised for authenticity, especially compared to her. More than opposing the Rolling Stones as a band, she opposed a system that championed their kind of masculinity, while misunderstanding her own. At the end, it wasn't about rivalry with the Rolling Stones for Mitchell. It came down to principles. In a world of distortion pedals and swaggering frontmen, she chose clarity, depth, and honesty. There was no point in competing with the noise. Something real was what she wanted to give to the world. And thus, she forged a legacy that is still uniquely hers, not only in what she created, but by what she resolutely refused to become. If you thought her critiques couldn't get any more personal, the last name on this list turned one of her most intimate songs into a mainstream success, and Joni was not impressed. Judy Collins. The relationship between Joni Mitchell and Judy Collins is one marked by tension, irony, and conflicting views on artistic credit and integrity. On paper, the two should have been allies. Both were prominent figures in the 1960s folk scene, both known for their emotive voices and poetic sensibilities. However, their connection became strained following Collins's 1967 recording of Both Sides Now, a song written by Mitchell that became a major hit and effectively launched Mitchell into the public eye as a songwriter of note. Collins's rendition of Both Sides Now reached number 3 on the U.S. charts and earned widespread acclaim, giving Mitchell a significant career boost. Many would have expected Mitchell to feel grateful toward Collins for bringing her song to such a large audience. Instead, Mitchell's reaction has often been described as ambivalent at best and outright dismissive at worst. Over the years, she has made it clear that she never particularly liked Collins's interpretation of the song, a sentiment that has colored their dynamic ever since. The source of this tension seems rooted not in Collins's performance itself, but in the way it shaped public perception of the song. For a time, Both Sides Now was widely associated with Collins, and not Mitchell, even though Mitchell wrote it. To an artist like Mitchell, fiercely protective of her work and deeply invested in the emotional authenticity of her songs, this misattribution may have felt like a personal violation. The idea that her song, drawn from personal experience and poetic intention, was being presented and popularized in a voice that wasn't her own likely contributed to her coolness toward Collins. Collins, for her part, has spoken openly about the frosty undercurrent in their relationship. In interviews, she has recalled hearing that Mitchell didn't like her version of Both Sides Now, but she has always seemed unbothered by it. "I think she's a little jealous," Collins once said, brushing off the conflict with characteristic pragmatism. From her perspective, she was doing Mitchell a favor by exposing her work to a larger audience and helping to jumpstart her career. The suggestion that Mitchell should have simply been grateful underscores a philosophical divide between the two artists. A divide creates itself between Collins and Mitchell over their respective views of success and artistic control. Collins seems more commercially minded, viewing music as something to be shared and adapted for the masses to enjoy. By contrast, Mitchell is famously exacting and emotionally indulgent with her art, often preferring it in its most pure and personal form. A cover that lacks the emotional nuance she intended might feel to Mitchell less like a compliment and more like a misrepresentation, especially when that cover ends up defining the public's understanding of the song. This tension also represents a larger theme in Mitchell's career: her rather thorny relationship with commercial success. She has fought against attempts to commercialize her artistry through much of her life, and has clashed with many who attempted to mold her art for mass appeal. Under these conditions, Collins's polished and accessible version of Both Sides Now may have acted just as that very dilution which Mitchell has tried long to avoid. Even though such a cover would excite most other artists, Mitchell's repugnance exhibits a deeper concern over unqualified artistic authenticity. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Joni Mitchell's most unforgettable critiques, give this video a like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more music legends and controversies. And hey, don't stop here. Click on the next video on your screen to keep the stories rolling.